Okay, welcome everyone, whether you're in China or America or anywhere else scattered around the world. We're very lucky to have this series of events for HNC's 35th anniversary this year. We have various events with alumni, panel discussions, and the like. And over the 35 years since HNC opened in 1986, we've graduated over 3,000 alumni, both international and Chinese, who are now pursuing quite interesting careers in different walks of life. We're especially happy today to host this discussion with Brian Linden, who is from the HNC certificate class of 1987-1988. That's the second cohort at HNC, so almost at the very beginning of this unique experiment, which has already lasted 3.5 decades through huge changes in the world and in the surrounding society in China. Brian Linden has just completed a book which is titled Redefining Diplomacy, One Village at a Time. And it traces what he describes as his, quote, unlikely journey from working class America to China. I'm going to give a broad outline introducing Brian, and then he'll fill in some of the gaps of his fascinating and really quite unconventional life. Brian first went to China in 1984 on a scholarship to study Chinese language in Beijing, and then stayed for 2 years working as a cameraman for CBS News. Among his projects during those 2 years were interviewing Deng Xiaoping as well as other national figures in China. He then spent his year at HNC doing the certificate program, returned to the United States after that, where he did an MA degree in Asian history at Stanford University, stayed in America for 15 years, and then in 2004 began the next chapter of his life, moving back to China with his wife, Jeannie, and 2 sons, Bryce and Shane. And his goal in moving back to China in 2004 was to build a rural retreat for real cultural exchange between visitors and local people in China. And this was quite an involved process, selecting the site for doing this. At first, he and his family spent an itinerant 2 years roaming around from village to village, including along the old Silk Road route, seeking a site. And then eventually they decided to settle in Xizhou, which is near Dali in Yunnan province. There in 2008, they founded the Linden Center, and the Linden Center has won a large number of awards for sustainable tourism and local cultural preservation. And since then, Brian has not only made the Linden Center a great success in its original location, he's also opened spin-off projects in Shaanxi, not too far from there, as well as more recently in Suzhou, which is not too far from Nanjing itself. So in many ways, Brian's long and deep engagement with China exemplifies the kind of knowledge and engagement with China that many of our alumni have developed, often starting with their stay at the Hopkins Nanjing Center. So I was wondering, perhaps, Ryan, if you could start us off by telling a bit more about how you came to China and to HNC. I read an excerpt from your book, and you described your personal background in Chicago, which is, I think, a little different from many HNC students. I wonder if you could say a bit more about how you came to China and this set of interests in the first place.
You know, in many ways, and thank you, Adam, and thank you everyone for coming. And I'm very honored to have spent that 1 year and at the Hopkins Nanjing Center, and it still resonates. I not only got a great education, but I also met my future wife there, who was an Asian American studying Mandarin in Nanjing. And she was the main reason I went back to Stanford. I followed her back home to San Francisco. She's in the room right now too with me. We're now in Kunming in transit, heading back to Dali. But when I say unlucky, why I really, use that term is, I come from a pretty working class background. I had no exposure to China at all. In fact, the reason I came to China was really because I couldn't identify it on a map. And why I say that is, I was a community college kid. In many ways, my father was was more or less illiterate, and my mother, we were not very well off. And I put myself through community college by cleaning carpets. I would rush every morning to a grocery store and rent a carpet cleaning machine, put it in the back of a van, and go out and clean carpets. And gigs would be directed to me via a carpet laying company. So one day in 1983, when I was in night school in Chicago, I was cleaning carpets in someone who I didn't know at the time, but was a University of Chicago professor. And when I entered his house, he had a world map. And as I entered, every place that he had visited, he had a red flag. So Europe was covered, and maybe Mexico, wherever. And he asked me, after cleaning for about an hour, he called me up and he said, "Hey, buddy, could you put this flag in China?" He said, "I just got back from China." 1983, very few people were traveling to China. And he said, "I'm so proud. Help me put this up in China." And I got in front of the map, and I told him, "I'm sorry, I don't know where it is." And he more or less laughed. He thought that I was joking. And then after a few seconds, he realized that I was being honest, and he sat me down. And it was really the first time in my life where anyone who had a PhD, anyone who was very educated, sat down and questioned me about my life's choices. And he said, "Is this all you want to do for the rest of your life, clean carpets?" And I told him, "I don't have many options right now. I'm going through night school, trying to make," and he said that he just came back from China, and he said that Chinese government asked him to find English teachers. My English was horrible. Man, my English was very working class American. And I felt that China did not deserve this type of English teacher. But I was curious, it piqued my curiosity. And about a month later, I came across in my night school, which was Northeastern Illinois University, a poster that said "Study in China, scholarships available." And I applied, and I figured that America didn't want me. Why would China want me? But about 2 months later, the Chinese embassy called me, and they said, "Are you Brian?" I said, "Yes." And they said, "We'd like to invite you to Beijing University." And I said, "Are you sure? Are you calling the right person? This is the carpet cleaner, Brian." And I said, "Did anyone else apply?" And they laughed. They said, "Yes, yes." And I said, why in the hell did you choose me? I don't know anything about China. And they said, "Exactly for that reason." They said that you were the one who needed it the most. And interestingly enough, at the time, I had to write an essay. And my essay was titled more or less something like "Wanting to go to China to find my American dream." And it was the idea that in some ways the American dream had failed in some ways my family, I felt, and that I was on the road to possibly a similar life. And I was willing to give everything up to try to find a new dream. So, 25 years, 28 years before Xi Jinping coined the term, I had already started talking about this idea of going out to find maybe my dream in China, a Chinese dream. So that I arrived in China at the end of August in 1984. I never attended a class at Beijing University. And why is that? Because the second day I was there, I was out jogging in front of Beijing University, and a yellow Mercedes stopped in front of me. And 3 people got out of the car and started really, in a very animated way, started talking to me. I couldn't speak a word of, I didn't understand. I thought they were maybe the Ministry of Education saying they wanted their scholarship back. They found out I was a carpet cleaner. And no, it was not that reason. Who it was the head of the Beijing film studio and a leading director and also a leading actress. And they were making the first movie supposedly since '49 to have a foreign leading actor. And they asked me through translator if I wanted to play that role. So they had been, my second day here in China, suddenly I'm stopped and I thought it was a joke. I thought it was a hazing incident. I thought, and if it had not been a hazing incident, I was thinking, God, they must have been driving around for 35 years because I don't know, there were no foreigners in China. So suddenly to get on my second day, have them stop me and say, would you play this role? It was, obviously it was life altering, and I ended up agreeing to film the movie. It took about 3 months. During the movie filming, I was interviewed by CBS News, and they gave me the position. I owe everything in my life right now. I would never have been to the HNC. I would never have been to any, my life would have been completely different had it not been for that professor at the University of Chicago, had it not been for the gratitude and I mean the graciousness of the Chinese embassy in giving me the scholarship, and for everyone who has kind of in some ways given me opportunities that were in no way commensurate with my pre-China background. So ever since then, China, I have vowed to kind of in some way live a life that kind of express some gratitude to China.
So after you were in Beijing for those 2 years, you came to HNC. I was wondering if you could say more about how you came to HNC, what made you decide to do the program, and what you remember about HNC at the time. I've actually seen photos of when the center was being built in the early to mid 1980s, and the surrounding area. It looks like a totally different world, a totally different era, what Nanjing looked like at that time. But perhaps you could say more about your time at HNC and what drew you to HNC in the first place.
You know, Adam, I was just so honored by HNC. I had met HNC during a talk when I was with CBS News. And I never imagined that somebody would offer me a free education, because I had to work so hard to get through community college and night school. And HNC was saying at the time that there were potential scholarships to go and study. And, I went down there and I saw the place, and it was a very easy decision. It was the first program in China where you could live with a Chinese counterpart. And I felt that was so innovative at the time, because at the time, I think I don't know, Adam, if you were in China when the first time you came to China.
First time I came to China was in 1997, so quite a bit later than that.
So it was much different. And I think that, to be able to spend time like that with the Chinese and to interact with a Chinese roommate and to go to classes with them, that was something that was still so innovative at the time. And when they offered me the opportunity, I gladly took it. Nanjing to me was an incredibly easy place to live. I had spent most of the previous 2 years in Beijing, and I found that the lifestyle being in Nanjing, I found the people to be quite a little bit softer. I found the people to be very warm because there were absolutely no foreigners around. And it was quite a wonderful experience. There were very few there at the time. There was only one private restaurant. That's where we went sometimes to change money. I don't know if you remember. Do you know what changing money meant? For those who remember back into the 80s.
Oh, like the foreign exchange, like
foreign exchange certificates. Yeah. So it was just being phased out at the time, but we were able to sometimes do that. There was just one private restaurant. It was a little place, and it was called Sneaky Joe's. And that was the only place we could go to. There was no coffee. There was obviously no fast food restaurants. But in many ways, that made the experience much more exotic. And it forced you to, when you left the front gate of the HNC, you were immediately immersed in a China that hadn't changed too much in the previous 35 years. Or 40 years, whatever. Now, when I go back to Nanjing, I'm always so amazed by by the changes, as in almost all the large cities, like Kunming outside here where I am sitting now. This is in the new part of Kunming. This didn't exist 5 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, for those who don't know, the history of Wynanjing was chosen as the site for HNC in the first place. It was partly to avoid being in the political center in Beijing or the business center in Shanghai, to be away from those two hubs and somewhat closer to a more sort of mainstream middle of China. So that would certainly be a different kind of experience than living in those other two cities at the time. So most of what you talk about in this book is the Linden Center, and I've actually visited the Linden Center briefly. I think about a decade ago, I was on a trip with my mother to the area, and we were driving around various places, and we decided to stop for lunch at the Linden Center. You were away at the time, so I didn't have the opportunity to meet you then, but I've seen the area that this is in and some of the stuff that goes on there. I was wondering, perhaps you could tell us a bit more about what the Linden Center is and how you see its mission.
Sure, Adam. And I should preface it by saying why did we use the name Linden? It isn't. I'm not any. It's not narcissistic in any way. Because of the movie that I made, we felt that if we had any brand recognition among older people, perhaps it was some people would still remember maybe the movie. And that's why we called it the Linden Center. And we are a hotel predominantly, but that hotel is really our social enterprise. I guess you would say our Chuxin, our founding principles or our beginning was really the idea of addressing people-to-people diplomacy, coming up with a way to impact diplomacy, to take diplomacy down from what was being done at Zhongnan High and in Washington, D.C., because I felt that in many times it was so, the people were preaching to the choir back home. And what I felt in some way was I wanted to be able to have an impact at the people-to-people level. What I wanted to create was almost like a 24/7 Davos, a place where we could host retreats, where people could come, and we would not only provide them with an incredibly immersive experience, but also maybe with some intellectual programming, so that we would be able to do anything from filmmaking to culinary arts to environmental studies to microfinance. A few weeks ago, we just did something with the AAIB, Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, and with David Aikman from Davos, formerly of Davos. And those were the things we wanted to do when we started the center. We had to have, though, a business element to it, obviously. We wanted to prove to the government that in some way the remaining, some of these heritage sites could serve a purpose, a financial purpose for the local communities. We were worried that from 1984 until 2004, when we started our searching, is that we saw China make incredible changes, but we also felt that sometimes the attention or the protection of heritage or the highlighting of heritage was often pushed aside in the pursuit of kind of sexy designs and new designs and steel and glass. And we decided that somehow some of the remaining structures could still serve as assets to the communities and also great sources of pride to the local communities. So in 2004, I was originally accepted into a PhD program at Stanford. But in 1990, after 2 years of doing all the coursework, I was hired by a Swedish firm to start establishing education programs around the world. So for 14 years, I worked on projects in almost 80 countries, setting up, doing education investment. I learned from those experiences that somehow, if we could create a platform in rural China, that I could probably fill it with some incredibly, kind of indigenous programming opportunities or programs. So that was the impetus. My wife and I gave up our jobs in 2003. We quit our jobs. We sold our house, and our boys were 5 and 8 at the time. And we took all the money we had to our name, and we came to China. We didn't even know how to articulate, and probably to this day, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to describe the center. Sometimes we use terms of like the social enterprise, but we are a hotel. We want to, provide employment. We have to prove to the government that we have a functional business. So at the time, we were even more uncertain how to describe what we were doing. Here we are telling, my wife's parents, my parents, hey guys, we're giving up everything. We're taking the 5-year-old and 8-year-old, the 2 boys, and we're going out to China with a few backpacks, and we're going to try to find an old house. So, but we were very clear in what we wanted to do. And the idea was to find that first place. And we looked for 2 years, and we chose Xizhou as the first place. The site that we took over is a national heritage site. I don't know if you knew that, Adam, when you were there. But what that means is that it's protected at the level of, say, the Great Wall of the Forbidden City. So in some ways, when the local government granted us the access to the building and we started to work on the project, it was in some ways still uncertain whether or not this could even be done in China. So we have, ever since then, in many ways, we have been protected, I think, because of our values, because of our jiazhiguan, because of the way we're approaching our projects. The government has given us both protection to continue to do these projects and also access to other projects that are in some ways sensitive because of where they're located or whatever, because they want us to have a social impact. They want us to have an impact on the community. So the center, I can tell you that our first center meant to inspire the locals. Our first site has 16 guest rooms. We had about 55 staff when we've only had one site. We were trying to really instill pride in the local community, give them opportunities to stay in the village, make them realize that when you visited Adam, that you were there because of them, not because of maybe a large, luxurious steel and glass, guest room. Our center is not overly comfortable because we are a national heritage site, a wood structure. So people who come to our center are really coming for the cultural experience. And that has to go beyond our front door, and that has to incorporate the locals. It's very hard for us to involve the local community if we ourselves are not also in some way interacting with them and ensuring that they are also getting much of the financial benefit of our presence in their backyard.
Yeah, I think you mentioned an important point that you have worked closely with the local government on this, and that in some ways, I think you mentioned in the part of the book that I read that you'd opted for those local government partnerships over a more conventional kind of private investor or commercialized route, and that you felt this gave you more leeway to do this. I've actually done a fair amount of research on rural development issues in other parts of the world, particularly in Latin America, and I've seen how difficult it can often be to get local buy-in for any kind of development project, whether it's from local officials or just ordinary people living in the area. I was wondering if you could say more about how local people, sort of not local government, but people who work for you. I understand you really emphasize employing locals and making local people feel a sense of ownership and cultural pride in this kind of undertaking. I was wondering, perhaps you could say more about what reaction you've got from local people and how you've managed to build buy-in for this rather unusual undertaking.
Well, I guess it starts with the physical structure of the building. the type of project that we did is, it takes longer time, much more patience, and much more investment. And for many in the business community, they would prefer to just go in and build from scratch. And often when you build from scratch, you build in a way that is probably going to target your client, and that's usually larger rooms, big bathtubs, and everything. So the local community witnessed us taking on this kind of this project, a real challenging project, and not only taking it on, but employing only local workers, only a local architect who was a Yizu woman to help us with these projects. What we wanted to do, we wanted to demonstrate was these were the resources of these local people. Their grandfathers built these buildings, and we wanted them to have the pride and the opportunity to have to work on the projects with us. So that was the first step. The second step was obviously employing them once we started. But more than that was trying to overcome maybe some of our lack of luxury or our physical limitations by offering free, every experience at the center starts with a free morning tour where we go out and we visit the locals, we go to the local market, we go into local crafts homes. We, so that's kind of part, it really forces, or not forces, but encourages all our guests to go out and have that experience with the locals. We also have an architecture tour that is free every day. And that allows people to understand why these buildings are so important and how they were influenced by outside, how they incorporated various building traditions from the region. And the third thing was we wanted our visitors to somehow interact with the local community and share their knowledge, share their experiences. So from the beginning, we have offered all our guests the opportunities to give lectures to the local communities, share their hobbies. And we do that in the evening, and we open those talks to the local community. It is free of charge. They can join in. We have dedicated 50% of our buildings to public spaces. We've created wonderful libraries, children's rooms, game rooms, fitness center. I'm thinking so much in Chinese because I've just been always just with the Hubei government, for the last few days. And, so what we tried to do was make them realize that they were part of our project. They were our family. And ever since then, they've called me the Cunjiang, so Lin Cunjiang. So they call me the village head. And mainly because of this outreach, what I discovered early was that, we wanted to set up this Davos type of setting, but at the same time, we also wanted to target young people. And so on our second site, we created a site that would be less expensive so that younger people and students and schools could use that site. And we created for example, we worked with Sidwell Friends, President Obama's girls' school in America. And we do their 4-month program on that site. We work with Shanghai American School. We do 4 one-month programs with them. And what we try to do is turn the local community into really incorporate the community into their curriculum, so that when those students, very important students, come to visit Xizhou, they are there to also learn from the locals. And what I found is that has instilled a lot of pride in the local people. No longer are they just serving as a backdrop for outsiders to come in and open up souvenir stands and cafes, but they themselves have become the focus of really of most of the the visitors who come through our doors. And that's quite a few people who come through us now. So those are all ways we tried to do that. I can even tell you in one story, we set up education programs that will highlight, say, architecture for young people, creative writing for young people. We do the same programs that maybe you would hear talked about at Davos, and we turn them into small programs as well for younger people. During a filmmaking workshop, and for all our programs, just to let you know, for every 2 full-paying students, we offer a free spot to a local student. We still have to pay for that student because we bring in, directors from around the world to teach these courses, but we feel that it's necessary for us to ensure that the locals feel that participation in our projects. Why I talk about the filmmaking workshop is we had 2 young girls from Shizhou, the Bai girls, and they made a movie called The Spirit, the Soul of the Bai. And we really liked the movie, so we submitted it to the New York Youth Film Festival, and it was accepted and received an award. And suddenly these 2 girls, we sent them over, we flew them over with our team, and they stayed in Times Square and they participated in this workshop. And when they came back after 1 week in New York City, we went to the airport to meet them with her parents. And the first thing we said was, 美国怎么样? 你觉得怎么样? And the first thing they said is, 我们没想到美国那么穷. Because they went to New York and it was not the America they thought. They saw homeless people, they saw graffiti, they felt that it was a little bit dangerous. They rode the subway out to, Columbia University, who was kind enough to help a bit with the logistics. And they came back and that was the first thing they said. And for us, it's so interesting to think of 2 young girls in Shizhou who have really never even probably been to Kunming, and for them to have that experience and still feel so proud to be back home after that trip. And that's what we want to do, is instill that pride and respect for some of these local cultural and social resources.
It seems that it requires real imagination to think of how all these different parts fit together to try and realize this vision. I think in the excerpt I read, you mentioned John Ruskin and Jane Jacobs. I was wondering if you had any sort of intellectual inspiration for doing this project, or if there were any models elsewhere, whether in China or other places in the world, of this kind of rural experiment that you drew on or that inspired you, or was it something that you largely developed out of your own experience on the ground?
I think that I was inspired by I guess because I have such an emotional connection to China. In many ways, I call China really my Shifu, in a way it became my own life's only master. And it gave me opportunities that I still am tickled, and that until this day, that I'm living a life that to me is just so far beyond what I expected when I was younger. So when I traveled around the world, and I've been to over 100 countries, doing various projects, I just found that the interest in and maybe the respect for China was never as great. I would often be out and I would be talking about China, in South America, or I'd be talking about China in Central Europe. And it's like, there wasn't that much interest. They'd say, improve your Spanish, or who cares about that And in many ways, I took it personally. It felt like they were in some ways overlooking my father, or overlooking, an important teacher in my life. And that's what inspired me to go out there, is that I felt in some way I wanted to demonstrate through a project, through a business, but something that really had a social focus, my respect for this country. And I was hoping that in some way this platform would in some way enhance China's soft power through a small potato, but still just contribute in some small way. But at the same time, it would also reflect the curiosity and maybe the grit that is a bit of the soft power of the outside world. And I wanted to build those bridges. So for me, I felt that too often the discussions I was having in America with scholars, sinologists, I felt like we were all preaching to the choir, and we were living in kind of like almost like cultural country clubs where everybody kind of agreed with what, we all were just staying in our own little circle. And what I wanted to do was go out there and get away from that. We chose Xizhou mainly because it was so far away and so isolated. And it no longer is because of the popularity of Dali. But our goal was not to go out and seek in any way and replicate our safety net or, our comfort zones. We felt that in some way we had to serve as an example of reaching out and going beyond that, and hopefully allowing people like you to go out and maybe see China in a slightly different manner through our programs, not solely through a meal. And I hope that someday we can get you down there to really experience some of our
look forward to that. Yeah, I think looking back at the last since the 1980s, looking back not only at HNC's history but also how much China has changed. I think one huge change has been the horizons of many people in China. I mean, many more Chinese travel abroad, study abroad now. It's a much more urban society than it was, and I think there is a demographic in China that is probably increasing its interest in this kind of cultural heritage and preservation, that it's not only a kind of Faustian novelty of building more skyscrapers and the visible signs of prosperity, but there's also a real interest among many urban, educated Chinese, perhaps who have more resources and broader horizons to rediscover their own country, to rediscover the rural hinterland, as it were. I've taught a rural development class at HNC over the years. And one thing that struck me sometimes is that each year I always have a few Chinese students who've grown up in cities, and they've often never or almost never spent any time in the countryside at all. So going out, doing a trip to interview peasants in rural Anhui or somewhere like that is as much a novelty for them as it is for many international students who come. Sometimes international students may have actually had more rural experience other places than some urban Chinese. I was wondering how much those kinds of people are part of your audience, attracting people who may not have that kind of rural or more traditional experience within China to come out and rediscover part of their own heritage.
Right now, originally they are about 85% of our guests at the center were foreigners. Over about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, we saw a major change. And before COVID, we were probably at about 60% Chinese and 40% foreign. During COVID now, obviously, we're 95% Chinese and 5%, expat from Shanghai or whatever. Mm-hmm. But we are seeing a greater interest in having these experiences. And what we're trying to do is facilitate not just solely the physical, which I believe China does so well. Many of us who have traveled around China, we're constantly, I was just in a very rural area of Northeast Hubei, and the hotel was still incredible, so nice. And the physical, the infrastructure and the hospitality, infrastructure is so refined right now. But what I feel is that sometimes the soul, the spirit behind it, the content is sometimes lacking. And we really I feel that sometimes many of us are so proud of the last 30 years of kind of this economic miracle and the achievements of China that we sometimes overlook the previous, 4,970 years. And I believe that in some way, those 4,970 years are probably China's greatest source of soft power. And I believe the last 30 years are a reflection a little more of a harder power, the money, the financial aspects. So what I'm hoping is for China to demonstrate the respect of the outside world for that 970 years that preceded the last 30, and just show that for me, China, when I came in '84, China was 82%, rural, and 18%, urban. 95% of the population was under the World Bank poverty level. So what we see now is what I think about 60% urban, 40% rural. Is that right? I believe somewhere around
something
there.
like that now. Yeah.
Yeah. So that transition has obviously enabled the people to become much more efficient and much more productive. But I do believe that connection, though, that sense of place, is lacking in some people. One of my favorite characters in literature is Levin from Anna Karenina. And the idea in many ways that was kind of Tolstoy's portrayal of himself, and it's almost biographical. And that idea of that connection with the land, the willingness that even though he was of kind of almost like royalty, kind of a little more of a royal family, he still connected so much with the peasantry, with the farmers, with the land, with working, getting his hands dirty. And he is really in many ways, somebody that I feel that I always, aspire to be. No matter how much education you can get, no matter how much you have here, I believe that without something here, in your heart, I feel that it's kind of empty. I don't feel it's being used in the best way. And this is something that Jeannie and I, we risked our whole life to do this. We sold our house and we had $600,000 18 years ago, everything we owned. My parents have no money. We don't have anybody to protect us if we got, and so we invested all of it in this project and we had no guarantee. The US Embassy told us not to do it. Everybody said, don't give us this headache. What are you guys doing? You have no protection. And yet I believed in the people around me, the governor, the prefectural party secretary. We would have meetings and I had to take my 5-year-old and 8-year-old into those meetings with Jeannie. And we'd pull out their books and we'd set them there and they'd start doing their homework. And they looked at that kind of passion, that kind of idealism and probably naivete. And they said, how can we let these guys fail? But for HNC grads, what I think it's a reflection of is there are so many opportunities in China. And if you can still I'm still being asked every week by different governments to come in and just replicate our passion, replicate our values. They will invest. You just go out there, we need those values. And I believe those values are being developed at places like HNC. And what I think we need to do is broaden our horizons and realize that there are opportunities in China that go beyond Shanghai and Beijing and Guangzhou. And that there are opportunities to go out into these second, third, fourth, fifth tier cities and still have an incredible life with or without Starbucks and with or without City Shop, with or without an international school. We homeschooled our 2 boys for 11 years. It was hard, but we did it. And that's because we were driven by passion that went beyond just simple business decisions. And because of that, the government continues to welcome us because they have seen this demonstrated kind of commitment.
I think maybe we can open up for questions from the audience here and get more people involved in this conversation now. So if you have a question, you can either type it in the chat box at the bottom of the screen or in the Q&A. So let's open up for any audience questions that we might have.
Let's use the Q&A box. It's easier for us.
Okay, you use Q&A instead of chat. Just use the Q&A box. So, anyone have any questions? So I don't monopolize the conversation for too long.
For some of you we're looking at future projects. We just did the project in Suzhou, Adam, as you know.
Yep.
And we've purposely expanded very, very slowly. Just so we currently have 6 sites that we are running.
So where are the other 3? So you have the original one. There's one in Shaxi, right? Somewhere near there. And then the Suzhou one. You have 3 others?
We are doing in Dali, we have 3 sites. And one is the education site. And one is a larger site that also has a cooking school and craft workshop and conference center. And then we have the site in Shaxi, which is in the Shibaoshan National Park. And the project we are working now on is in the Gaoligong, in the Tengchong, in the north of Tengchong. And we will be trying to connect the Tengchong site and the Shaxi site, connect them by a 350-kilometer long hiking trail that will go into the isolated villages where we will work with the villagers to ensure that the money goes right to the villagers and stays in those villages. So that was part of the discussion with AAIB and with our recent conference.
Okay, let's see if any questions are coming up here.
Brian?
Yeah, I can't see John, I'm sorry, so it's okay.
Go ahead. Adam, you want to read the question?
Yeah, I can see. So let's see. So Gary Huang has asked a question. What's your take on the US-China relationship now? I'm in Japan. I've been out of China for 2 years since COVID. It seems the tension is escalating. How is the sentiment among Laobaixing on the ground, especially in Yunnan and rural China? I think in the book you talk about your frustration with some of the tensions between the US and China, and you see this kind of fine-grained encounter on the ground as a way of building people-to-people ties. I wonder if you could comment on how you see the relationship and the tensions and what it's like trying to do this work amid an international situation, which is probably far from ideal.
You know, Adam, I believe that our mission is needed even more important. And to be honest, I've had absolutely no negative kind of reactions yet here in China. We are constantly being asked by governments to come in to work with them. We have we have opportunities to take on investors regularly, and we have turned them down. So I feel that if the government and the private investment community is interested in seeing us grow, I believe that's probably a very good sign. I meet with the US government pretty regularly, 3 times a year, 4 times a year, just going through, I visit them. And I often ask them, I just asked Consul General Heller last week in Shanghai, I asked him, do I look stupid? Am I kind of, because when I worked for CBS News, we interviewed Sidney Rittenberg, and Sidney had been in China since 42, and he was thrown in jail after 49, and he was very active during the Cultural Revolution, very he was very pro-Maoist. And I felt that I was worried that in some way, maybe my praise for China would be regarded as almost being brainwashed, because some Westerners will ask me that. And Jim told me, he said, please continue to do what you're doing. What I think we need people to people, this kind of diplomacy and reaction. And HNC stands for that. And I think all of us are trying to continue that mission. And I have had no negative feedback. And I am in rural areas all over China. I give talks all over China in Chinese, and I have never had a Chinese say anything negative about it. Like saying, what do you think about it? Or even, be a little bit negative about what's happening from the American side. So again, my goal is I'm not an apologist for China. And I don't think China needs apologists. But at the same time, it's not that I'm blinded, I'm not brainwashed. But what I'm trying to do and what my book stands for is it's trying to be a document that relies solely on stories, on real stories, from 37 years, being arrested 18 times, these kind of things. And still this passion for this country, and maybe the 95% positive that never gets reported back to the world community. I find the Chinese people to be still very, very hospitable and gracious. And I would not want to be anywhere else right now. And I believe that these ideas of trying to build bridges are needed more than ever.
That's certainly, as you note, in the spirit of HNC. We often get questions about how we're faring in this more tense international climate. And I think the way that we tend to think about that is that, we are doing people to people, we're doing academic exchange, we're dealing with encounters between societies in this global context. And that's a different layer from the diplomatic tensions. Obviously, those diplomatic tensions sometimes can, cause frustration and so on. But we are here for the long haul, right? We're carrying out a mission which is about people rather than about tensions between governments. And it seems very much in the same spirit. There was one question here about how do the locals view foreigners now? I guess that's in the vein of what you were saying about not hearing negative reactions from people. Would you say there's any difference in perceptions of foreigners in rural areas like that?
Not at all. Jeannie's here too. Jeannie, do you feel there's any? So, oh, I'm sorry, she's sleeping. It was a long train ride. But Adam, absolutely no changes. I was in a small village last night in a little restaurant, and a bunch of young guys came in. In America, I would think they would be the kind of guys who, if I were Chinese, maybe would say something, maybe I would feel a little uncomfortable there. But the first thing they did, two of them came over right to my tables, looked at, welcome to China, welcome to our place. We love, thank you for coming. I mean, this is so charming. They didn't know if I spoke Chinese or not. They didn't even give me a chance to say anything. So, I mean, this is still so cute. And I know that many of us who are restricted or limit our movement to the big cities will view that with skepticism. And all I can tell you is come out with me on these trips. Go out and visit the places, interact with the governments, and say who you will see are so hospitable. They will not, you cannot do anything without them saying, please, can we get this for you? Can we do? So, I mean, I have seen absolutely nothing that reflects the negativity or kind of some of the challenges right now in our geopolitical relationship.
Slightly different question I see here. This person says, I've seen videos and articles about the Linden Center on some popular Chinese social media networks, and you've worked with some Chinese influencers to create content. What's your take on that? How do you use modern technology and social media? It's obviously a kind of huge gap between the original encounter with China and working in a rural area versus using high-tech media and social media networks to spread this vision far and wide. How do you use technology as part of this nowadays?
To be honest, Adam, I don't know. I'm just doing, in many ways, Adam, the Chinese community has expressed quite a bit of interest in what we're doing, and in that regard, we're very, very honored. We get interview requests probably once every other day. So what I still don't use Facebook. I don't use a lot of the social media, but I realize that we must have some kind of presence in order to share our mission. And so often when they come down, we do not pay for anything. We started this was something that I learned from CBS News, is that, we were never going to cover story just because there was somebody wanted financially to invite us down. And we refuse to pay for advertising when people do those things. And I think in the beginning, when I did that 12 years ago or 14 years ago, and CCTV and Remy Rubal and China Daily saw us, and they were really curious. Wow, these people there must be some news to this, because they're confident enough to say that we're not just looking for marketing opportunities. So we have continued in that vein. We don't pay KOLs for coming over, but if a KOL wants to visit and spend time, I will share my time, if I have it, with them. And so we do not target them, we only respond. And in that regard, we're probably not the best marketing. We're marketers, but we feel that that's something that's more consistent with our focus really on the social that we're trying to do. We're trying to daily, we're getting our hands dirty. I'm busy with that, working with the communities. And that's what inspires me. I love doing that. So if we can get enough customers, which we seem to have been able to do in the past, we're fine with our current reactive approach to that kind of social interest.
There's a question saying, I admire your courage and dedication to your ideals. How do you make difficult decisions in your life and career? What's the secret? Is there anything you feel regretful about? Is there anything you would do differently in hindsight?
I guess I think first I would say that one thing you need is a partner who has similar values. This would never have been possible if Jeannie we had not been interested in doing it together. So our mission is really something that was created together. And I think that's so important that somebody's partner has to be in line with these, because there is so much risk and uncertainty. I guess maybe the thing that for me, one thing that has really had the greatest impact in my life, negative impact, is a fear of flying. And it developed over time as I was traveling constantly. And I think when I had children, suddenly I started to realize how other things in life were very, very important. And that has impacted my ability to go home and see my mother, go home and see my sister. So I don't fly home very often. I haven't been back to the States for 4 years now. That is a big regret in my life. And I turned down many speaking engagements at conferences and everything because I can't just go to Beijing from Yunnan for one event, because it takes me so long by train to get up there. So that has been the fear of flying has been bad. It's really had a bad impact on my mother. Finally, at the age of 80, my two sons were able to get my mother to China for the first time. I told my mother that outside of my family, China has had the greatest impact on me in my life. And I felt that it was important that she saw that. And I felt that she should realize that her son was so greatly influenced by this country. And I wanted her to see that. So at the age of 80, my two boys who went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison to take care of my mother in my absence, they all flew over, and she came over a few years ago, and she could understand. She says, I see why you're here. She also loved it. So yeah, that regret, I think, of being probably not being there as much as I should for my sister, for my children, for my mother, has been a regret. But my family here in China, my 200 staff, the people, my village, my neighbors, they are part of my family too, and I feel a great obligation to them as well.
Do you feel culture shock when you go back to America?
I could never go. I could never go back and live in America. No way. Um, yeah, I do. Unfortunately, Adam. I sometimes think in America we're so caught up. Sometimes I feel, our 自由, which in a way was kind of, I think, probably a fairly nice term, has turned into 自私, selfishness.
Mhm.
And I feel that I just have a hard time I grew up in an area, I've had guns pulled on me 3 times, I've knife fights, drugs at 13. It's, that's a reality of America as well. And I can go anywhere in China. My wife can walk anywhere. And as you know, we can do that safely here. And it's so different from what I grew up with. And I'm so worried sometimes about my boys because they're back in the States and I remember the crime that I witnessed and I can't help but think about them. And so for me, I would rather live in a place like China where just, it's safer. That there's in some way, it seems like there's an optimism here. There's not the victimization ideas that I sometimes feel that we see and maybe in other cultures. And this to me has really been it fits my personality now.
Mhm. You mentioned your children. There's a question about that because you homeschooled your children, at least initially when you went to China. There's a question about what they're doing. Did they grow up basically in China from that point onwards? You mentioned they're in the US now, but how do they experience this kind of bicultural upbringing and being immersed in a very different environment?
My 2 boys were 6 and 9, 5 and 8 when they first started living here. And we homeschooled them all the way through high school. But during the summers, Jeannie, more than I, would take them back to the States for a 1-month period or a 2-month period. And I feel that my oldest son identifies more with America. And he graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He's currently in Rochester, New York with his girlfriend who is in medical school there. And my youngest son, who is currently a graduate student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, studying environmental planning. And he would very much like to return to China and help us and work on these projects in Yunnan together with us. So yeah, so I feel the oldest will probably not return to China to live full time, but I do hope that the youngest will return to this. He started living here at 5 and 6 years old. China is really his home.
Actually, considering China one's home, I think there's a kind of question a lot of foreigners who spend time in China often contemplate, and you've said multiple times that you consider China home now. I mean, what do you think that means for a foreigner to consider China home? Because we often hear sort of ideas about being a perpetual guest or a transient or things being precarious and so on. But clearly you've put down roots and you feel a strong sense of belonging. How do you think it is to have China as one's home as a foreigner compared to other places in the world?
I believe that it's always pretty, it's never very stable, Adam, because the reality is it can be pulled away so quickly. And I believe that China, I want China to be my home. And I've really, I hope I've demonstrated it through all the projects we have done and our commitment and everything we've tried to, share with the outside world about this country. but there's always the institutional challenges of, the idea of a green card is not as common here. So you never feel as secure. Tomorrow I have to go and do my, physical for the visa, for the yearly business visa or whatever, a residence. And, if something, maybe if they found something, would they renew the visa? You never know. And this to me is, I guess, why every day is so important here in this country when Jeannie and I are here, because we do love it here. And I think we do value every day here because we're worried in some way, just like when you're with a loved one who could be taken away from you, we're in some way, sometimes we feel as if this experience, which has been so important to us and continues to remain important, could be pulled away from us.
There's a question here. Somebody's asking if you have any examples of cross-cultural miscommunications or examples of culture shock experienced by foreign guests at the Linden Center. Do you often have to navigate through cultural frictions or strange expectations or interactions or misunderstandings? I'm sure you must have a lot of stories over the years.
Not as many as you would think, Adam, because I think that going out to Yunnan, a traveler almost pre-screens himself or herself. You have to make an effort. It's not flying into Shanghai and going maybe on a 20-minute high-speed train to Suzhou. I mean, you really have to make an effort to go to Yunnan, and that means doing your homework as well, and probably knowing why you want to go so far, to Southwest China. So I found that most of our travelers are very, very savvy. I would say that one of the bigger mistakes is my own mistake is that, I went into Xizhou, and when I hired all those staff, remember I told you all the workers were from the local community. I felt that we asked how much was the day's salary, and I think it was 40 renminbi at the time. This was 16 years ago, and I said I want to pay 45. And I wanted to demonstrate to them that I'm here because I want to be a part of them, and I want to care for, I want to try to, I want them to grow with us. I want to share. And I realized that approach made a lot of people pretty angry, other businesses. And it also in some ways skewed it made people think that I came in and was almost, arrogant, thinking that in some way we were there to help. Our idea was not there to come there to help. But in some way, I was so caught up with the idea of trying to demonstrate to them right away our desire to be their friend, our desire to be their family. And I think that approach caused probably more problems than benefits. And I learned from that very early.
There's a question about the pandemic and its effect on this whole model, as virtually no foreigners have been traveling to China for the past 2 years and will not do so for a long time. Do you think this will have a negative long-term impact on the understanding of China by the rest of the world? We're obviously dealing with our own students not being able to enter China at the moment. And I think there are concerns that this can impede people-to-people understanding or very much thin out the scope of interactions between China and the rest of the world. And do you see this having a lot of an impact either on your own operations or potentially broader, depending on how long it goes on for?
It has had a major impact on our business right now. Our education business has dropped dramatically. And I do believe it will impact the people to people. What I'm worried about right now is that some of our long-term partners are canceling future programs. So not even thinking that delaying or postponing, saying like we'll postpone another year. They're just saying we can't do this anymore. So I do believe it it will have an impact. But at the same time, I don't think any of us really know what will be the post-COVID, world, the experience anymore, and when travel will return to normal. I just don't know. China inevitably is going to be the major player in the world, in terms of geopolitically and economically. And I think it behooves all outsiders to try to learn about this nation and, learn about it. And I think we should all be looking at opportunities for us to continue this interaction, not go and hide our heads in the sand. And I'm worried that that's sometimes when I get the cancellation kind of notices from schools that I would expect better, I'm a little disappointed in their long-term planning. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. Yes, Adam, and it has had a major impact on our business. Not so much financially, but I'd say also intellectually. That interaction between the foreigner and the outsider and the locals was so interesting, and it really stimulated us, and it allowed us not only to take the social enterprise, which we were doing through the hotel, but it allowed Jeannie and I to get this intellectual stimulation, daily through these kind of education programs. And without that existing now, we are focused more on really being a hotel. And that's fine, but in a way we always wanted to be more.
There's a question about impact. It says there seems to be a desire for many young tech entrepreneurs to make a huge impact measured by the numbers of people they touch, users, page views, etc. Your entrepreneurial model has been successful, but very different, having focused on creating a deep impact for a small audience instead of building a large new US-China social network or something. How do you view impact and scope? Because I think in the sort of social entrepreneurship or NGO world, there's often this question of scale, doing things in a very concentrated way locally with this kind of dense personal engagement versus scaling things up or doing things across a much wider area. Is this something that you've thought a lot about, and what goes into the choice of concentrated impact versus more diffuse, perhaps with a larger number of people?
I would be lying if I said that we didn't want to have a large impact. And I think we started the center because we started it ourselves and our values were so clear. We were unwilling to take on any investors that allowed us to scale from the beginning, do a larger project, that we approached it in a way that we felt was something we could handle ourselves financially and intellectually. And it was something we chose. Our goal was to have a large impact. And I believe we are now. And I believe that large impact isn't solely through social media. I believe that the large impact can now be done. But I have to say, social media helps us a lot and gets our message out. But we have not changed in any way those values. And what I'm finding is that those values in many ways speak for themselves and are attracting the kind of larger scale opportunities for us through the media, through everything. So Adam, from the beginning, we wanted to have a large impact. But how do you do that? I mean, how do you have a large, impact on diplomacy? Do you do NGO work? We didn't know. So Jeannie and I did everything we could with everything we had to just set up that initial platform. And we hope that almost like if you build it, they will come. We hope that in some way it would kind of grow from there. And I believe doing things like with AIB and doing things with, with David from Davos and different things, I believe that kind of demonstrates that I think we have had an impact that's gone far beyond the small little seed we planted 17 years ago.
Strange kind of question just occurred to me. Do you think it would be possible or as necessary to do something like this the other way around, for example, for Chinese travelers in America or other countries to have this kind of on-the-ground experience? Or is there something about China which makes this more necessary or maybe more of a a lift to try and do this kind of thing on the ground?
I don't know. If I were to say this, I feel that sometimes in the Western world, I'm worried that there still are remnants of a slight 优越感, almost like this, this superiority complex, where I don't feel that some people who I interact with take China as seriously as I wish, as I do, or respect it in the same vein that I do. And I'm worried that in some ways, China, I feel, is still very open to learning and very curious about learning from the outside. I believe that sometimes some of the places I have been in the Western world often feel they already have most of the answers. And I'm just worried that I don't know how much of an impact it would have in the States. We have had a wonderful impact here, but we are trying, as I said, a two-way soft power kind of approach. The idea is we are exposing visitors to a different type of China, one that often leaves them feeling, wow, this isn't Sanlituan, and they come away feeling really impressed by the gregariousness of the local people, their social traditions, their cultural traditions. And then at the same time, Jeannie and I are examples of outside soft power. I have to say that it's every day I am complimented by local Chinese, by in small villages, saying, thank you so much for doing what you're doing. Sometimes they will say, we're almost embarrassed. You're doing what Chinese should be doing themselves. And here you are risking everything because you want to somehow protect, Chinese culture and somehow project it outward. And I don't think it's warranted, that kind of praise, but it does show, as I said, maybe, at least maybe we're doing a little bit in showing the outside world that there are people outside of China who also care about this country, respect it. And we enjoy being a face for that, for those people in rural Yunnan.
It seems in a way you're turning a lot of assumptions upside down, and you're creating kind of alternative strategies or alternative narratives. Because on the one hand, in terms of scale, there's a lot of rhetoric about 5,000 years of history and sort of grand ideas of cultural identity and continuity, but you're really shifting the focus down to a micro level, this real texture in a locality and daily life. And in the same way, people often talk about sort of soft power or the impressions that China makes on the world because of the scale and the modernity and the very visible large scale signs of modernization, but you're actually drawing attention more to the deeper history, the longer term history, and the older aspect of China in a sense, and people to people engagement rather than this kind of sort of diplomatic mode of gaining respect in the world as well. So it seems you're turning a lot of these assumptions upside down that's built into the project in a way.
No, we enjoy that. And, there's some people have shared statistics with me in the past. And I think what's interesting is, like, a country, when we're talking about this 5,000-year-old culture, is China's built culture right now. When you take, for example, the current age, the mean age of the buildings that exist right now in China, it is among the youngest in the world because of all the new construction. And I wonder what happens to people's sense of place when there no longer are these physical touchstones with the past. In America, the average age of a building is somewhere around 75 years old. I believe somewhere, these were the statistics, and in Europe, 130. And in China, it's under 2 decades.
I've seen that figure. I think it's how long they're expected to last when they're built. I think it's something like that.
Yeah, so no, that's also how long too. But no, it's like, I think, like, if you were to take the current, but what I'm thinking is that, for example, sometimes I go out and visit, these rural areas, And we just asked the government officials, could you show us like maybe some of the older homes? We want to learn from them. We want to see how they were built, everything. So if we were to do something, how we restore, often they can't identify any. And, that's just amazing that they can't find a building over 30 years old. And so I feel that in some way the built architecture will always should have an impact on us all. Architecture is probably one of the most influential forms of art. It's something we can't avoid. If there's a building out on, in London or in New York, and you drive by it every day, you're going to see it every day. You could go a whole lifetime without reading James Joyce, or without listening to Bach, or without seeing an Ingmar Bergman movie. But you can't avoid seeing that building every day. And this is something that I feel in some way, what happens when your emotional touchstones are removed and you don't see anything that has to do with this so-called 5,000-year-old past.
Coming back to the beginning, the book that you're publishing, when is this going to be available, the book? Is it going to be available on Amazon soon?
I don't know, the book is being published by Zhongxin, so CITIC Press. And I wrote it initially for the Chinese market. So the first book will be in Chinese. And we have more or less cleared all the censorship, issues, which were not as challenging as I had expected, but there were 3 layers of them. And I hope that it will be published on January 1st. So so it'll come out first in Chinese. I wrote it I wrote it for the Chinese people as a sign of respect. And I wrote it because I felt that many of my Chinese friends and colleagues know that there's so much negative comments, being written about China. And it's not the China that I know or that I've seen over these 37 years. I'm very proud of this China. And I wanted to share that pride. It's in some ways it's so easy for us to write love stories about a single person. And in many ways, this is kind of a love story about a person who has been enchanted by this country. And it talks a little bit about that and how I feel I am such a better person because of China.
So it seems like a very timely moment to write the book. So I certainly hope there'll be an English version of it as well that our alumni and guests can buy. So I think we're almost out of time. So I guess to wrap up here, I'd like to thank Brian, obviously, for this fascinating conversation and the sharing the experiences that he's had over, I guess, more than 3.5 decades involvement with China so far. The audience as well, thank you for attending. And I'd emphasize that in addition to this event and the other events in our 35th anniversary cycle series, you can also continue to engage with HNC and the anniversary cycle in various ways. We obviously continue to look for all kinds of support and investment in HNC's future. And we're very happy to count everyone as members of this extended and really quite unique cross-cultural community. As I mentioned at the outset, we have over 3,000 alumni who've graduated from HNC, both international and Chinese, since we opened. We also have countless friends and supporters among former faculty and others who've followed everything that we've been doing during this long experiment. We particularly encourage those of you who are interested to get involved in supporting the center and its students in any way that you can, whether through mentorship, involvement with our career services office, or financially supporting any of the initiatives around the 35th anniversary to strengthen what we do by way of open academic exchange and building cross-cultural understanding. As you may have seen in some of our alumni emails, we have some strategic priorities around the anniversary year, including support for student fellowships, for experiential learning, postdoctoral fellowships, and cultivating faculty excellence. So these are just some of the ways that you can be engaged and help support the community. Amanda Bogan in development has shared some links in the chat now. So if you want to look at the website and some of the priorities that we're emphasizing, you can certainly look at that. And we'll also be sharing future events, including other alumni panels in the coming months, culminating in the biggest celebrations in June of 2022. So thanks again, Brian, and thanks to our audience for attending. It's been a wonderful conversation to have today. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Hey, Amanda, John, thank you, everyone.